Today's Conquest community shoutout goes to Druss Raw. He is a YouTuber specifically focused on Conquest Reforged, with content including community showcases and tutorials. There is some great inspiration on his channel and certainly worth your time to subscribe. Help our community grow by supporting our content creators. Now back to the video. Hey all, it's DuconRed1 and welcome to another build showcase video. This particular build is by ColFeters, or Colonel Feathers if you must. But in this video, I will just call him Feathers for short. We will be checking out a 1700s French frontier fort he built on the Darwin Reforged server using the Conquest Reforged mod. You can check this out for yourself at Warp Fort. Feathers has been in the Conquest community for 4 years, spending 3 of those on the Darwin server. He has achieved mastery badges in architecture through the completion of this plot that you are seeing, and nature from another plot built on this server, and currently holds a moderator rank among the community. Feathers is a teacher by profession and has a deep fascination for history and wildlife biology, which you can clearly see demonstrated in this incredible build. So Feathers, why don't you give us a little idea about what we are looking at here?
So this is a North American colonial fort, something I always wanted to try out because, you know, most stuff on Conquest is medieval themed. And so this fort is actually from the mid-1700s, North America. It's based on some real-life forts in the sort of northeastern part of the United States. Fort Duquesne in what's now Pittsburgh, Fort Ligonier, and several others.
And that's absolutely fantastic. One thing that I particularly like about this build, I saw it about a year ago when I initially explored this plot, and this was before I actually came back as Ducon, and I was like, I have to make a video on this fort. And I was just so, you know, it just had me all down that I had quit my channel and everything. So this was like, I had to come back specifically to make a video for your fort. I just love it. I love that. I love this build that much. But anyways, it's just really cool to see the stylization and how you have incorporated the colonial culture into Conquest. So I'm noticing that there's a lot of details around the fort, and not to mention, you know, you got a camp for the soldiers back there, and then you have this massive logging operation. So I imagine that's very purposeful because, you know, you got to use a lot of lumber to build a fort like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, when the fort's made entirely out of trees, you're going to need a lot of trees to build it, plus all the firewood to keep everyone warm and cook all the food and everything else. Plus, you just needed space to build, so they had to clear the forest to begin with just to have enough space to build the fort. And so clearing trees and cutting down timber was a constant thing that these folks would need to do to keep this fort up and running.
Absolutely. So I imagine there's a lot more to see, so let's make our rounds.
So this is the cabin where the hunters and trappers would live. You know, fur was a really important part of the economy. I mean, the whole reason the fort would be here was to take advantage of the fur animals that would be here in North America. Over here is the shed where they would, you know, skin the animals, prepare the skins, maybe even take some of the meat, maybe to sell to the inhabitants of the fort. This is the shed where they would dry skins or store them for later transport to the markets, potentially, you know, overseas, all the way back to Europe.
So one thing that I notice in particular is the river that separates the backside of your fort from the forest on the other side. Now naturally, the river would be a defensive barrier so that they wouldn't need to defend this side quite as substantially as the front side. So there, I see there's a lot of details down the river here, and obviously it's the lifeblood of the people that are colonized here. So why don't you give us a little insight as to what we're looking at here?
Yeah, as you said, the river is really important. Transportation, we see some different kinds of boats. There's some birch bark canoes that the natives would have used and that the French colonists would also have adopted as well. There's a river barge, which would take larger goods, furs, and things up and down the river to try to resupply the fort. And the river is also important for food. There's salmon. There's some places where salmon are being smoked, and there's also a little duck blind down here where you can see that the colonists are, taking advantage of the waterfowl that they could use for food that would be living here on the river.
So something else that particularly interests me is how well that you have made these forests on your plot. Generally, people just take a whole bunch of trees and just slap them together in a forest, whereas what you have done is you have taken the realistic values of these trees. The leaves would be towards the sunlight, which would be on the outskirts of the forest, and then the interior of the forest, where sunlight does not reach, would be more or less dead. So you'd have this open interior and very bushy exterior. So why don't you give us a little idea as to what brought you about doing this?
Yeah, definitely. I just, lots of experience, in forests. I have a background in biology, and so, like you said, I realized that, the outside is where the sunlight is, and so that's why the trees on the outside are a little more bushy, a little more thick. And when you come to the inside, the trees are pretty bare. You're seeing lots of trunks, dead branches, and so on. And that leaves it open for, animals and other things to be a little more visible inside the forest as well. Another little detail over here is the little herd of elk, and they're actually being driven by a wolf towards the rest of the wolf pack that is sort of waiting in ambush up ahead for them.
So now we're on the east side of the plot, and I'm noticing that there's a lot of development over here, agriculture and a lot of structures. So what's going on here?
Yeah, so we've got all kinds of buildings where the settlers would be starting to expand their community. We have a farm, little inn, a barn being built, all kinds of outbuildings, crop fields, places where the settlers would be starting to expand their reach out into the wilderness.
Yeah, quite obviously. I mean, this is being a frontier fort. It's usually always the start of a settlement, because little do people know that a lot of the towns that we know in the modern day were started by frontier forts and military encampments that first settled the territory and prepared the way for settlers to come. So I really find that neat that you are showing the initial stages of that going on right here. So Fetters, as an attacker, I am noticing how intimidating the defenses of this fort are. So as an attacker, how would I get into this fort?
Well, yeah, there would be lots of things you'd have to overcome. I mean, first there is this wooden worm fence down here in the ditch in front of the fort. After that, you'd have to climb the little hill here up to the wooden stockade wall, and along that stockade wall there would be loopholes for guys with muskets and guns to fire down on you, so that wouldn't be very easy to get across for sure. You've also got these sort of triangular bastions by the two main gates, and those would provide even more stout defense for any defenders to try to repel any attacks.
One thing that I really like about this fort is in between the stockades and the first line of defenses and the main fort, there is a settlement that is practically built within the fort itself. That is actually a really interesting detail. There's a lot of different buildings here, so why don't you give us a little idea as to what each one is?
So yeah, there's a sawmill to help get lumber for the buildings and repairs and things like that. We've got places for some animals to be raised, also a place for butchering and smoking of the meat from those animals. We have a latrine to try to keep the area clean as possible. There's a chapel. Religion was very important at that time, and so a chapel was an important part of any settlement. Trading posts where people can trade for different goods. a bunkhouse where visitors can stay. There's all sorts of tents and cabins being erected just to show that, the area is growing, and that, as more settlers move into the area, there's, more space and buildings are required to meet all their needs. And then we have the gatehouse. There's a drawbridge, a bit of a tower that would give the defenders a much greater advantage over anyone trying to get in.
Man, I love the atmosphere of the interior of this fort. There is just, it just feels so right. It feels like it exists in the real world. And that's thanks to the Conquest Reforged mod, of course, but it's just, not to mention your skills as a builder is just absolutely stunning. So why don't you give us an idea of what each of these buildings are? I'm sure each one is full of very purposeful details.
Yeah, definitely. So we have stables. Obviously, you need horses, are main mode of transportation. Under the bastions, there's actually the powder magazines where they would store the gunpowder. They needed to keep that in a very safe location. We have barracks for the soldiers. They tend to be in the upper areas of each of the buildings. In the lower areas, we have the mess hall for the common soldiers. This is where they would take their meals. We have a kitchen and storage area where all the food for the 100 or so people that would be in this fort would be prepared. There's a bakery in the one corner of the fort where all the bread would be prepared. There is a quartermaster. This was the guy who was in charge of, making sure that everyone got paid and got all the supplies that they needed. So his office is in the building. There is the officers' quarters. This is where the more important soldiers, the officers, would be able to stay. They had their own private dining area, their own private sleeping areas. And then we have the commander's house. This was the most important person, most important officer of the fort, and so he has his own house where he stays with his family. Much nicer accommodations, a little more space, a lot more privacy, as well as workshops, blacksmiths, and other things to keep the fort and all of its equipment working smoothly.
Well, Fetters, I am just absolutely floored by this build. When I saw this last year, this was before I came back officially as, Dukan, I had to make a video on this plot. That was the only thing that was going through my mind when I first saw it, and the quality of this build speaks for itself. You are a fantastic builder, and I'm so glad that you were willing to share this build with us. So thank you.
Well, I'm glad that you guys are able to come take a look around the build. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did building it. It was definitely an experience, and I definitely learned a lot doing it. And I hope to see some of you guys join us here on the server.
Well, if you guys enjoyed this video and want to see more, I have a second, more detailed walkthrough listed in the description below. If you want to see this build for yourself, you can join the Darwin Discord listed below to access this server and use Warp Fort to explore this plot. This was built using the Conquest Reforged mod, which adds thousands of new textures and models to Minecraft. This gives builders the tools necessary to create magnificent compositions like you have seen, and we are always looking to help prospective users into our community. That being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Until the next time, bye-bye.